2000 Olympics in Sydney. You're in the squad with some very familiar names to Glory fans. Stan Lazaridis was there, Vince Grella, Mark Bresciano, Hayden Fox, Mark Viduka was in there.
It was magical. I think it was one of the biggest highlights of, being a professional sports person.
The Dream Car Rental Dream Team. It's a six-a-side team.
Can I do this incognito? Can I have the dark silhouette around me and change my voice?
Yeah, we'll pick and refer to you as Derek.
Okay.
Yeah, so.
Definitely Diego Castro. Rio Ferdinand, he was just a fantastic person and fantastic football player.
Ferdinand Castro Viduka. Rocket's going to be fuming if you don't put him in. He's going to be fuming.
Let's put Liam Reddy in. Let's keep the local Liam Reddy happy.
Hi guys, Gareth Morgan here, welcoming you to another episode of Glory Stories, the club's official podcast brought to you in association with our proud club partners and great friends Drimtel Perth Glory and Drimtel, a winning combination. Now, just a heads up that this is likely to be the penultimate episode of this particular series as we kind of hurtle towards the end of the A-League season, but we will be maintaining our proud tradition of top-notch guests in both of these upcoming episodes. Starting today, of course, the man sitting to my right, well, he's an Olympian. He was a part of that Australian revolution at Leeds in the late 1990s and early 2000s, and he also played for Glory during the NSL era, and he has continued to serve the club with distinction. He is our current ALM even, goalkeeping coach. Danny's here. Danny Milosevic is here. Danny, thanks very much for coming in. I should have mentioned as well that you are unofficially, I think, the club's part-time philosopher. Would that be true?
Sometimes. Just at training sessions, Gareth. Thank you very much for the introduction. Appreciate it.
No worries at all. Sometimes some words of wisdom and sometimes delivered in quite firm terms to those goalkeepers.
Definitely, especially when the session doesn't get off to the start that I would like. Obviously, I have to deliver it in some more sterner tone. So yeah, no, definitely, it's definitely the message has to go out to the players.
Tough love,
correct.
Danny. Sometimes I think what we'll do today, mate, if this is all right, we'll dip into the past occasionally, but we'll start with the here and now with you as a coach, and then look back at your playing career a little bit as well. Was coaching something that you always looked to get into? Was there always a coach inside you, even when you were playing? Were you kind of analysing things, or how did the journey begin?
I was definitely interested in coaching, spending a lot of time in football, obviously as a player. I looked at different options. I worked in a family business for a certain period of time whilst I was getting my accreditation. So I did have it in my mind, but it wasn't obviously the first choice in terms of vocation after playing football. So. But definitely once I got the bug for coaching, I really loved it, and I really want to do more and more and more. So.
And during your playing career, Danny, I'm guessing that possibly in the earlier parts of it, specialist goalkeeping coaches, not every club had them, did they, at one time? So who did you work with under in particular that sort of was an influence on you goalkeeping-wise?
Oh, good question. Probably back in the day when I had the opportunity to go to the AIS, I think Paul Jones was a fantastic mentor for me. Perfect timing as a young 14, 15-year-old goalkeeper going into the AIS. And he was magnificent at the time. He'd obviously, work with all sorts of different goalkeepers coming through the AIS, Clint Bolton, and, a wide array of big names, really. So guys that had played on with the Socceroos, through their career. So he was a major influence at such an early age for me.
It's an interesting one because I know that as well as your goalkeeping badges, you've also got, I think you've got your pro license, haven't you, as well? So not just a goalkeeping coach. Are you looking at some point to sort of spread your wings coaching wise and look to move beyond goalkeeping into a more general coaching role?
Yeah, definitely. I think what was most important for me to obviously get those accreditations to obviously, if I'm playing a supporting role to head coaches, it was important obviously that the head coach could obviously have that trust and look on the bench and say that, I've done sort of the football education in terms of getting a pro license. And yeah, naturally, obviously the next step would potentially be in the future to look at being a head coach one day somewhere in the football world.
Who were you on your pro license with? Let's drop some names for us, Danny. There's
Drop some
usually
names.
some names.
Drop some names. Let me think back to the day. So at the moment, it would have been Giancarlo Italiano, who's coach at Wellington Phoenix at the moment.
Yep.
Arthur Dillis was on there, current head coach of Melbourne Victory. So there was some, outstanding candidates in terms of head coaches. So it's sort of inspiring me and sort of pushing me to, as I said, in the future, look at potentially being a head coach and obviously starting that journey as an assistant coach and then obviously going on to head coaching.
Dan, it's an interesting one. There's not a lot of goalkeeping or former goalkeepers that have gone on to be high-profile, successful head coaches. I mean, Dino Zoff was one, Walter Zenga. I think Nuno at Nottingham Forest is a former goalkeeper as well. Yep. Is that just a quirk, do you think, or why do you think that might be?
I think being a goalkeeper positionally and obviously playing, there's obviously a lot of coaching during the game, I suppose. Obviously the talk is centred around, instructing players on what to do. So I think over the time of the playing, you sort of get to pick up a real insight in, tactical positioning, players' body shapes and all those things surrounding coaching. So I think, it's probably a natural progression for a goalkeeper to obviously first be a goalkeeper coach. And then I think, if they're looking to go further into it, to obviously use those skills that they've learned as a player into actual, outfield coaching and the tactical side.
Yeah, it's just interesting. Like I said, that the numbers are fairly low in terms of those that have become. Is it sort of? Do you think it's a prejudice against goalkeepers, that there's a perception that because it's such a specialist position that for whatever reason, even though, as you said, basically you've got everything in front of you, so if anyone's got a great view tactically, it's the goalkeeper. But do you think there might have been a perception perhaps in the past that you're so obsessed with all those weird things that goalkeepers do and all the stuff that you get up to that you haven't got that bigger picture?
Maybe. I think also that, because it is such a specialist position and the head coaches sort of look towards the specialist information in terms of goalkeeping, I think, the goalkeeper coaches get maybe typecast for a certain period of time in terms of, developing goalkeeper, because it is a journey. It takes time to develop a young goalkeeper, also work with a senior goalkeeper. So, there is a great amount of detail that goes into coaching goalkeepers, both young and senior. So, the time spent on it is important and the focus is important. And I think, the guys that can go on, obviously, who have the opportunity to also be head coaches, I think they're looking for something different in terms of having been goalkeeper coaches and now wanting to go into that, more tactical, more leadership role, I suppose.
So it's a big question, this, mate. How has goalkeeping evolved and changed? I guess since you started playing. I mean, obviously, I think you would have been playing after the back pass rule came in, so we can probably leave that aside because that was a huge, cataclysmic moment, I suppose, really in goalkeeping. But how has the art of goalkeeping evolved
massively
over the years?
Yeah, it changed massively. So I was sort of coming towards the back end of the back pass rule, so where the goalkeeper could actually pick the ball up and roll it out when there was pressure. So, when I was turning, say, 15, 16, then those rules changed and the back pass was now you couldn't obviously pick the ball up. So it's made a major improvement to the game. Now, asking the goalkeeper to play it with their feet and what it's done for goalkeeping has been fantastic. I don't see any negative in it. It obviously asks the goalkeeper to now think not only positionally but tactically, and you can, teams around the world are utilising the keeper now like they should be as a goal player, not a goalkeeper.
And in one of your sessions, without giving too much away, or an average session, or even an average week on the training ground with the goalkeepers, kind of what percentage of time would you spend on their kicking game, whether that's the actual mechanics of the kicking, whether it's the positioning, whatever it might be? How would that look?
Every day. So every opportunity, every contact session that we have with the goalkeepers, the first part of the session would ideally look like that the ball is at the feet first. So back in the day, obviously that was vice versa, where the ball would be obviously in the hand first. But with my sessions, we're looking at getting the ball on the ground first with their feet, so it sort of engages them mentally in terms of using their feet and playing out from the back. And then, as I said, then we can start building from the ground up, basically in terms of handling and crossing. So but the focus is every day is when we get on the training park is obviously getting the ball at the feet and feeling that and engaging those different type of sensory values within their brains.
Subject of brains, mate, we know it's a massive mentally taxing position. Being in goal, you're hopelessly vulnerable there. A mistake is a goal. And I'm not singling Ollie Sale out by any means, but obviously there have been some incidents this season where there have been errors that have cost Glory goals. When, and not talking about Ollie specifically, but when you're working with a goalkeeper and they come back into training on the Sunday or the Monday, whenever it is, what's the sort of process there in terms of dealing with something like that? Because presumably they come in pretty down. And I guess it would depend on the individual. I'm sure it would. But what would be some of the kind of steps that you would take to just try and lift them out of that?
Yeah, definitely. It's there's been moments, across the seasons with all the goalkeepers. Ollie Sale is one example, but it's been a learning curve in terms of what we're trying to do in the training ground in terms of the technical aspect and the tactical aspect. But the flip side of the coaching is also the mental aspect. And as I said, when high-profile mistakes do happen, it's obviously a very difficult, situation in terms of for the goalkeeper because they don't go intentionally out on the park to make mistakes. Unfortunately, things do happen in games where either a concentration loss or something does happen. So it is difficult. It's a difficult one to deal with, but it's something that we have to obviously broach the subject. We have to discuss it. We have to find ways and means of obviously trying to break if there is a cycle or pattern of things that are happening or leading to an error or something like that we have to try and work out very quickly with the player on how we're going to sort of break that linkage or chain in terms of error making. So yeah, there's definitely been a lot of learnings across the years that I've been at Glory in terms of the different goalkeepers because guys have made mistakes at times where we obviously don't want them to, but as a coach, I have to sort of analyse the technical and tactical aspect and try and work out where we can fix those aspects. And then obviously the last part would be assessing the goalkeeper mentally and seeing how they can bounce back from, an unsavoury situation where, as I said, we don't train for it. We don't want it to happen. No one wants it to happen. But unfortunately, in our line of work and what we do, that, the 6-inch white line can sometimes make us either a good goalkeeper or a bad goalkeeper.
And in your own playing days, Danny, were you would you be back in the changing room punching a hole in the wall? How did you deal with? Not obviously you never made errors, I know that, but on the rare occasion you might have been perceived to make an error. How did you yourself cope with it? Did you get pretty down about it? Were you able to bounce back quite quickly? What did that look like?
Yeah, you get down about it because obviously it's sort of it's a judgment that you don't want having against your capabilities as a goalkeeper. So I would get down about it. I'd want to get back on the training ground pretty quickly to try and get myself back into the groove of things and trying to move on from the mistake. So, and that's what we try and do is we try and obviously look at the circumstances around the error. Again, we don't want to make errors, but it's a part of the game, and and there's a lot of learnings around when things happen like that, because as I said, there's no one wants to. We don't train for it. We don't want it to happen in the game. But as I said, it's unfortunately been a part of the game where we have to learn how to sort of move the goalkeepers on from high-profile errors and try and get them back on the park in terms of getting them mentally back as where we can be.
Just branching out a little bit, obviously we have a number of goalkeepers at the club that you work with, Ollie Sale, Cameron Cook, and then the likes of Jet Warner, a couple of the lads that come up from the academy for sessions as well. Just the way Australian football is structured at the moment, when you've got, at the moment as it is, Cam Cook not getting into the A-League first team, therefore not playing games, in your opinion, how sort of detrimental is that to the development of young, and I suppose even any goalkeeper really in Australia, that there's no reserve league, and most of the time if you're a number two, you're simply not playing games?
It's very detrimental. It's one of my pet hates about the Australian game at the moment, where especially with young goalkeepers, we want to expose them to obviously every situation possible, and if that means we don't want, again, going back to the mistakes, you've got to be playing it in games to sort of alleviate the opportunity to the chance for mistakes to happen, because obviously training is training. It's a whole different sort of ball game in itself. So, but I would like to expose as many of young Australian goalkeepers to as many match minutes as possible, because that's where the real learnings happen, playing in the games. And if we could come up with some sort of loan system across the whole country, where we could, as I said, when one of our goalkeepers aren't playing, or we could potentially loan someone to. We could obviously still own these guys in terms of a contract, but we could then, get them game time, which is the ideal learning curve for those young people.
I mean, that said, in the A-League this year, there's been a sort of noticeable crop of young goalkeepers, very young in some cases, teenagers, getting quite a lot of game time. What have you made of the sort of overall standard of keeping in the A? I know you focus on what Glory are doing mainly, but just casting a wider eye, what's been your take on the overall standard in the A-League this year?
I've definitely been watching. I think there's a noticeable sort of gap in terms of match minutes. Again, the young guys that have come in, Adelaide have used 3 young goalkeepers and they've changed 3 young goalkeepers. So, they're going to be of very high standard one day, but again, being able to give them a lot of minutes so when they come into the A-League environment that they can sort of, settle in quickly, get the confidence they need to, get up to speed in terms of, how quick or how, the differences within the game. So, across the board, obviously Sydney have brought on another younger, inexperienced goalkeeper who was, Devonish Mears, who's a great guy, a great goalkeeper, and yeah, it's just a matter of playing games. So when they do come in, because Australia's been, renowned for always having a great, talented crop of young goalkeepers, it's now getting them more game time so they can show their wares not only across the A-League, the NPL, but internationally as well.
It seems we're leaning towards kind of smaller, more agile goalkeepers than was the case, because it was land of the giants at one time, wasn't it? Where unless you were kind of 6'6", it was just, you're not getting a run. So that's quite an interesting development.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that's also the modernisation of the game of football now. So they're not sort of looking at 6'4" Goliaths and behemoths. They're now looking at it technically, tactically, physically, emotionally, how the goalkeepers can adapt to certain situations. And I think the profiling has sort of, eased a bit in terms of, especially in the Australian game. So we're looking at all types of profiles now, which is great because that's what goalkeeping's about. There's not one fixed sort of profile. Obviously, the English game is a little bit different where they're sort of profiling different keepers, but also they've sort of shifted towards, David Raya and those type of goalkeepers who aren't on the taller side, but, technically they're unbelievable in terms of being able to play out and commanding their box. So, the profile's definitely changed.
All right, mate, let's take a little dip back into the past. Now, you're sort of regarded, most people seem to regard you as a West Australian these days. I think you've been here long enough to qualify for citizenship or whatever it is that you get in WA, but you are, of course, originally from Melbourne. Can you just tell us a little bit about your family background and the sort of early steps on your football journey?
Yeah, definitely. My parents were migrants from Serbia back in the day. They were on a freight ship and ended up in Tasmania, of all places, and then moseyed on up to Melbourne, where it was too cold for them. So they decided to go up to Queensland. So the majority of my growing up was done in Queensland on the Gold Coast. So it wasn't a bad place to grow up. And then from then on, playing football in Queensland, represented Queensland. And then basically my family, once I went to the AOS and came to Perth after AOS and after being in Germany, my whole family followed me here in a 1-bedroom apartment in Scarborough. So I had a whole family living in my unit. So we've called Western Australia home since the late 90s, early 2000s.
And was it a footballing family? Where did your sort of love for the game come from?
Ironically, my mum was actually a handball goalkeeper in Europe. So,
okay.
Yeah, so that's why, she tells me stories, obviously, of her being for the love of goalkeeping and for the love of handball. My dad was a massive football fan. He wasn't much of a player himself. My older brother played, so we were always in the backyard, and I was always, because I was the youngest, I was always getting balls volleyed at my head, and the neighbours would come over, and they were all older, so I was always putting goals because no one else wanted to go in, and everyone else was, a striker back in the day. So, it was just a natural thing for me where I just felt being in goals was at home and something that I could really take to, and I actually enjoyed. I spent a lot of my time on the Gold Coast, as a young kid, actually being around senior football. So I actually probably made my debut in senior football at age 13, 14 because I was a bigger kid as well at the time. So I sort of fitted in, and that was probably, that was a normal thing back in the day. If you had a little bit of ability and you're a goalie, then obviously, the men would put you in and you'd go train and develop there.
All right, let's skip ahead a little bit, mate, to the World Youth Cup 1997 over in Malaysia. We have chatted about this in a previous interview. Mm-hmm. You're in a group there with Malaysia and Canada. Sorry, you're in Malaysia. The group has Canada, Hungary and Argentina as well, with Riquelme, no less, in the side. You draw with Canada, I think, then you beat Hungary, and then it's kind of all or nothing against Argentina in the final game. Can you talk us through what happened?
Yes. It was the probably worst possible start for us in terms of that game. I just remember the training session the day before. Les Scheinflug had, the names of all the Argentina's team on a piece of paper, and we were basically talking about how we're going to beat Argentina. So in the end, I remember we called Les Scheinflug. He wanted to be known as Boss. So basically, Boss got the paper. At the end of the conversation, at the end of the talk, he basically scrumpled up the piece of paper, threw it on the ground, and started jumping on it, and saying, "Okay, if we're gonna do anything this tournament, this is the time." So it was basically a do or die game for us. I think if we had lost, we would have exited the tournament. So we started really badly. I think we were down 3-0 after a very quick period of time, and then the boss actually decided to unleash a young player called Costa Salapacides. And Costa Salapacides changed, I suppose, his life, his name forever in terms of football, because he came on and scored 4 goals against Argentina and basically won us the game. And he became an overnight sensation. And it was probably one of the greatest moments as a young person to go into a tournament and beat the eventual world champions. And as I said, we all knew the quality of Riquelme and the players I had at the time. And it was just, the current Argentina coach, Walter Samuel, was also, in there as well. So there was a lot of, big names at the time playing for Argentina.
How devastated were the Argentinians at the end? Were they sort of shell-shocked?
Oh, it was because after 3-0, they were dancing. I remember Leo Franco, their goalkeeper, was like doing the Argentinian dance, and, it was like they thought that we were dead and buried. But as I said, the never say die attitude from us in terms of the competition and what we really wanted to go at, the togetherness. I think there was such a togetherness in terms of, going to Malaysia, and we'd actually, as a group of players, I think there was probably about 50 to 60 players who had actually grown up together from AOS days. So we'd maybe spent 3-4 years together, living together, actually getting to know. And I think, that was probably the biggest weapon that we had, is that we all knew each other inside out and knew each other's fighting spirit, which was, it was just amazing on the day.
You then get knocked out by Japan, edged out in the knockout phase. Was it almost as if you'd had your cup final at that point? Was there a bit? Do you think you'd just left everything in that Argentina game and couldn't quite get up for how do you remember the Japan game?
Yeah, it was a massive dagger to the heart, because I just remember it was just it wasn't the greatest goal that we conceded either, and I just remember that the expectation, we knew that Japan were a very good team as well, and we knew that we were in for a hard match, but you could almost say that the raw emotion of beating Argentina in a World Cup, especially at a Youth Cup, and having fantastic players, sort of took a lot of emotional energy out of the players, out of the team. But it was just, as I said, it was just such a heartbreaking way to go out of the tournament after beating eventual world champions Argentina.
Well, we'll stay with Australia, Danny, if we could. The 2000 Olympics in Sydney. You're in the squad with some very familiar names to Glory fans. Stan Lazaridis was there, Vince Grella, Mark Bresciano, Hayden Fox, Mark Viduka was in there as well. What do you, a home Olympics as an Australian in Sydney, just even before you set on the field, amazing. End up playing at the MCG against Italy, but just give us an idea of your feelings around that, your abiding memories, I guess, of that tournament.
It was magical. I think it was one of the biggest highlights of, being a professional sports person for me. Coming back, we were all young guys, obviously. Stan was playing with West Ham at the time, I believe, or Birmingham, and flying high in the Premier League. Mark Viduka was flying high at Leeds United. So for me personally, who, wasn't playing much at Leeds United at the time, it was a massive buzz. Look, I would have hoped to have a better tournament. Unfortunately, we lost all the games, but to play against, to play with our Olympic team in a home Olympic Games was just something that I'll never forget as long as I'm alive. And I just wish that we could have done, Australia a bit prouder in terms of, going potentially through the next round. But we did have Italy and, Honduras and Nigeria who were quite strong. And unfortunately, we weren't able to win any of those games. But I just still remember walking out onto the MCG with 96,000 people and just, turning around and somehow I just saw my family. I didn't know where my family was sitting in the crowd, but somehow I just managed to, and I just saw my family give me a big wave before kick-off, and it just sort of eased the nerves beforehand.
Must have been incredibly emotional for them. As you said, they've come to Australia on a freight ship. And, there they are. There's their son, at the first generation, I guess, Australian out at the MCG representing the country. It must have been huge for them. Not a dry eye in the house, I shouldn't think.
No, it was a hugely emotional moment, because I know that the hardship they had to obviously to leave their family, because they were quite young themselves. 16, my mum and dad were 16, teenagers respectively, to leave their home nation and just to give it a chance in Australia. They love Australia. They've been here obviously all their lives. My father's been passed away now for 18, 19 years, but as I said, they called this place home, and they've remained here. They've remained in WA. So their love for Australia and the opportunities that it's given, our family, our friends, and has been massive. And that was just sort of, I suppose, the icing on the cake of, being a proud Australian moment.
Well, by the time you go to those Olympics, you'd previously spent a season here in the West under Bernd Stanger, no less. Just looking through the squad that you were part of, it's just household glory name after household glory name. What was it like coming into that dressing room, and what was it like working under Bernd?
Magical. That's all I can say. It was a magic for a young person. I was just 18, coming back from Germany from a not so great experience in terms of not I wouldn't say not so great, but I came off a difficult experience in terms of Germany, where I learnt about true European football at a very young age, which was sort of helped me when I came back here. But to go in that change room with Bernd Stanger and Tony Franken and Bobby Despotovsky and some of the biggest names in Australian football was truly magical and inspiring for me as a young goalkeeper, as a young player.
And your memories of the support at home games?
Amazing. I used to love the drive from my house to now HBF Park. I adored driving past the front gate and just seeing people lining up to come, knowing that they wanted to come and watch Perth Glory play. It just used to send shivers down my spine, and you just get so what would be the word? So you just want to play. You just want to go out there and put on a great performance, and I think that's what made those moments really special. And yeah, everybody, other teams used to not like coming here, but they did like coming here because they knew they were going to get 18, 19,000 or whatever the stadium could hold back in the day, and it was just a magical experience.
And given your background in the Balkans, were some of the away games a little bit lively for yourself, especially being a goalkeeper, because you're always closest to the fans there? Could it get a little bit lively?
Yeah, definitely. I think I think that's what made it also so special, is that the rivalry of what you're talking about. I used to room with Mark Viduka, and obviously that sort of that sort of understanding of where our parents came from, and obviously our our heritages. And I think I remember back playing at Melbourne Knights, and I remember getting elbowed in the mouth as a 17-year-old in my first game, going up for a corner, and Andrew Marth just came and just gave me a massive elbow and basically said, "Welcome, son, to the big league." So I took that on board as a great learning curve. Obviously the pain was immense, but if I had any opportunity of wanting to mix it with the best in terms of going to Europe, and like I said, having a friendship with Mark Viduka on the journey, and he was a massive help to me. As I said, when things weren't going too well, he was always the first person to sort of help myself, Jacob Burns, all the Australian at Leeds, whoever needed help, he was the first person, irrespective of our heritage. He was always, we're all Australian, so he was fantastic.
Well, that brings me onto your time at Leeds. As you mentioned, so many Australians there at the time, and you got on well with them clearly. Did you live together? How did it sort of work? Or was it you just were with them at training and then hanging out after training? What did that look like?
We were together quite a bit, obviously, at training. So most of the days would be at training. So we were coming in early and spending most of the day, obviously, training, and then we'd go into the food hall. We'd have, obviously, lunch and do what we need to do, treatment. So we spent most of our time together in terms of, at sort of not Ellen Road, but at the training ground at Thorpe Arch. So after socialising, we did. I remember having, Mark Viduka would love having a barbecue in the middle of winter, so when it was snowing outside. So we'd get the text saying, I'm having a barbecue at 4:30, everyone's welcome, come around, myself, Jacob Burns. So we used to stand out in the snow and stand by the grill, keeping warm and obviously cooking a steak or two.
Some of the coaches that you worked under at Leeds, the likes of David O'Leary, Terry Venables as well, who was your favourite?
My favourite, Terry Venables looked like he was a great coach in terms of he loved Australian footballers. He understood the difficulty of leaving your home. All the managers at Leeds were fantastic. Obviously, we came there as young players, so David O'Leary gave me the opportunity to leave Perth and to come to Leeds United, and obviously mix it with Nigel Martin and Paul Robinson. So I'll be forever grateful to David O'Leary. Obviously, the late Terry Venables, he was just a legend of a man, and he was always caring and put an arm around you, and he knew the difficulties obviously as a foreigner coming into a different land. So look, I don't have a bad word about any of the managers at Leeds. They were all, as I said, very respectful, they give you your time of day and looked after us.
Very unfortunate for yourself. To have Nigel Martin there would be bad enough, but to have Robinson coming through as well must have been, very, very, very difficult to try and force yourself into the side in front of those two.
Yeah, look, looking back at it, the disappointment in terms of myself was unrealistic because obviously I had, I had an England keeper who'd been away with the World Cup, who'd played second string to David Seaman, and obviously the emergence of Paul Robinson was, fantastic, and also Scott Carson I got to need to mention because he came in, and so there was definitely an era of fantastic England goalkeepers, and I'm just privileged and grateful to have been a part of a time where, as I said, the standards were really high, so you had to lift, and I got the opportunity to do things in my life that I could only dream of.
Well, let's keep some of those Leeds names in mind because I think they may feature in our next segment, which is the Dream Car Rental Dream Team. It's a 6-a-side team. You can pick yourself if you choose to. Some of the guests have, some haven't. Some have preferred. Brandon was quite happy to just sit on the side in a trench coat and eat biscuits and drink tea.
Right, okay.
But if you want to start yourself,
okay.
you can.
Can I do this incognito? Can I have the dark silhouette around me?
Yeah,
and change my voice.
Yeah, we'll pick and refer to you as Derek.
Okay.
Yeah, so this is Derek's Dream Car Rental Dream Team. What are you going to go for, Derek?
Are you talking about a Perth Glory, Dream 11?
I reckon we can.
6?
Let's just throw it wide open. I think a Glory contingent would be quite good to get in there. But I think, bearing in mind the sort of the breadth of your career, I think we can open it up.
Okay, definitely Diego Castro. I have to just say he's a phenomenon. When he came to Australia, the start was very slow. I vividly remember him walking. We were training at Applecross, and he was like this slight Spanish, well-spoken in Spanish, I should say, not well-spoken in English. So, yeah, he arrived on the training ground, and we just looked at this guy when he first trained and just thought, oh my God, this guy is something else. So, Diego Castro is definitely one on the list. Rio Ferdinand.
Not bad. Okay, what made Rio special?
His personality. Not only his football, he was an outstanding footballer, could read the game really, really well, and just his defensive attributes at the time in terms of being, a young player, up and coming, just bought from West Ham, and then obviously sold to Man United after us. You just looked at his ability to read the game, defend, just so calm, his charisma, his personality. He was just always welcoming. He'd always give you the time of day. He was just a fantastic person and fantastic football player.
Seemed to cope well with that price tag as well, which must have been difficult at that age. Never seemed to faze him too much.
I don't think he just played football because he loved it. I don't think he actually even thought about the money he was being paid, or I don't think that ever came into the equation, because he just wanted to express and show people and also show youngsters from where he grew up that the dream can become reality if you work hard enough. That anything's possible, and he did it. It was a fantastic message that he sent out to young players.
Absolutely.
And
All
still
right.
does.
So Rio's in, DA goes in. Where are we going next?
Mark Viduka.
I thought we might have the Dukes in there.
Mark Viduka, he could just turn it on like nobody's business. Like, he was just a special football player. I got to stay in a room with him the night that Leeds beat Liverpool 4-3, and he scored the goals. And I can tell you, the night before, I don't think I've shared this story publicly, and I think it's time to do so, is that the night before, his wife was at home alone. I think they just had their first newborn son, and he had two massive Rottweilers, and they were barking in the middle of the night. And obviously his wife is concerned that someone might be prowling around the house, so he was getting, late night calls saying, I think there's someone outside, can you come back? Because normally if we played an early game, normally the kickoff against Liverpool or the big teams were like as 11:30 in the morning.
Yeah.
So basically the night before that game, he was drinking Turkish black coffee at 12 o'clock at night. So I don't know if you've ever had Turkish coffee, but you don't sleep. That stuff's like rocket fuel.
It is, yeah.
So he was drinking Turkish coffee at 12 o'clock at night, and I just thought to myself, this guy's never going to be able to get up and play. And he just turned it on.
Why did he play?
He play? Did the guy play? That guy, I've never seen something like that, and just absolutely turned it on and beat an amazing Liverpool team single-handedly.
Amazing. Great story. And Viduka's in. So Ferdinand Castro, Viduka. Are we putting yourself in?
No,
you're not putting yourself in.
I'm not putting myself in.
Should we go to keepers then? Now, this is where you're going to get into trouble. This is where we need to pixelate your face and potentially...
this is the 60 minutes moment.
This is it.
This is a difficult one because obviously...
So many.
I would like to say, a fantastic contributor to the game, especially in Western Australia, has been Jason Pekovic in terms of his, in terms of what he won as an Australian goalkeeper. He's a person that has done a lot of things for the game. It's a real difficult one to keep, because I've had the opportunity to coach, players like Liam Reddy, who's had his detractors across his career, but what he was able to do as a goalkeeper, as a person, was quite simply phenomenal. Obviously, Paul Robinson. There's a lot of names that I could say about how they changed their careers. So that's going to be a difficult one, Gareth. So, yeah.
Rocket's going to be fuming if you don't put him in. He's going to be fuming.
Let's put Liam Reddy in. Let's keep the local Liam Reddy happy. Let's put Liam / Jason Pekovic.
Right. Okay. Yep. We've got those two in there. We're going to need a reserve goalkeeper so they can alternate. That's fine. So we are up to 4. So we've got 2 slots left.
2 slots left. Okay. This is a real tough one. Let's think about Leeds days in terms of Perth Glory. I think there's a lot of legends like Bobby Despotovsky as a player. Back in the day, what he did for the organisation for Western Australia. I don't think that could be sort of overlooked either. Damien Murray. Like there's such a long list of players that have come through this club, and such a massive history that this club has, that it just can't be forgotten or can't be dispelled. So please put Bobby Despotovsky on the list.
Bobby's in.
Yep.
I think we might have room for one more. I reckon that's 5. Probably, I'm thinking a central midfielder, maybe.
Yep, a central midfielder. That's a tough one. Trying to think. Obviously Neil Kilkenny, I was a big fan. Jacob Burns. Obviously, there's again more guys who
will be fuming if you don't put them in.
That's right. You might have to pixelate. You might have to get the old 60 minutes.
Going to have to go into hiding. You've been witness relocation.
That's right. Yeah. We've done this in a secret place, in a secret location, so no midfielder that I made angry.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Look, Jacob Burns. There's such a long list again of Perth Glory contributors who have, as I said, they've done immense things for these club. I know that. Obviously, Burnsy was, he played Champions League for Leeds, so, he was a fantastic contributor to Perth Glory. Wore his heart on his sleeve. Neil Kilkenny is also a player that, has done great things. Also at Leeds, was another former Leeds player. So keeping with the theme alive.
That's good. I like that. I like that.
Running with a theme, because I'm just trying to think of other. Look, I had a really soft spot for a player called Olivier Dacour, who came from Inter Milan, who came also. So, but I think we keep it local, and JB and Neil Kilkenny and JB.
There we are. We've gone for more of a squad. We've gone for a squad.
That's right. We've gone for cover just in case they tackle each other at training, and
which is always a possibility. In fairness, knowing what those two are like, mate. We're just about to run out of time. I've got one quick question. You know, I'm obsessed with the old goalkeeping bags. We've talked about this before. I want to know what was in your goalkeeping bag when you had one. Why did they go out of fashion, and when are we bringing them back?
I totally agree. Why did they go out of fashion? What we used to keep in there was probably spare gloves, a towel. There was no tactics back in the day in terms of penalties. I don't think that water bottle thing was still evident in terms of the penalty shootout. So that still wasn't. Why did it go out of fashion? That's a really good question. I remember having a personalised one, so I felt really, really special. I was actually made up that I had my name on a personalised goalkeeper glove. I thought I'd made it.
Just for a minute, I was hoping it had your face on it. So that would have been so good.
So I think they will make a comeback eventually. I think, having various pairs of gloves that goalkeepers do, I think how they store them, but I think also hygienically, if you've actually smelt some of the goalkeepers' gloves after training, I think
that's true.
If they could come with some sort of deodorizer inside, maybe they might make a comeback.
Well, most retro stuff, it comes back, doesn't it? Let's face it, boots have sort of come back and been various types of boots have been relaunched.
I should say, like, I look at the retro stuff now and I go, wow, I'd love to get my hands on one of those old Roy Shaw, Macron. I love the Macron stuff, but obviously
specialist goalkeeper
the specialist goalkeeper stuff back in the day that was very colourful and flary. I suppose, like, Jorge Campos, the Mexican goalkeeper.
Absolutely, yeah. He was like a human flare, wasn't he? As I remember, there was a guy who played for Austria as well at the '90 World Cup, and it was just like
that's right. You needed sunglasses to watch him play, but
you did.
But that flair matched actually their technical flair and their ability in the game. It was just Rene Higuita, another one who was, who did the scorpion kick against England, just stuff like that. Obviously, I don't want our goalkeepers doing the scorpion kick, but just
I've seen you train them on that for an hour every day. I've seen you. That's what you do. But it was interesting, like you said, because that was really goalkeepers. I think going further back into the sort of 70s and 80s, they had quite a no-nonsense approach. They weren't until Bruce Grobbelaar. They were just, they were brilliant, but they were just sort of reliable workman-like guys who did what they needed to do. And then all of a sudden you had these characters who were, like you said, colourful in everything they did, in what they wore and the way they behaved as well.
Yeah, I think that's a real testament to how goalkeeping's sort of where it was and where it's gone to, because those massive characters, like David Seaman, like his hairstyle, the way that he played the game was immense, and he actually didn't care about his hairstyle because he was such an immense goalkeeper that he was so self-assured in terms of what he did and how he did it. He used to stand there with his hands behind his back during World Cup games. So if that doesn't give you self-assurance or the players assurance, then I don't know what will.
Absolutely. Mate, I could talk to you all day about these kind of things, especially goalkeeping bags, as you know. Hopefully we might see them coming back next season. I'm going to launch a crusade to make that happen. It's been fantastic having you in, Danny. Thanks so much for your time today. Really appreciate it. Really appreciate everyone who is downloading and watching the show as well on YouTube. Thanks very much indeed for your support. Thanks to Drimtel, our podcast sponsors, and your connection to possibilities. Thanks as well to Jack and Jeff for their technical assistance here in the studio. We will be back next week with another episode of Glory Stories. In the meantime, go well and go glory.